One of the things that we struggle with, both as a society here in the United States of America or whatever country that you might be watching this video in, and as a species, the human race as a whole, is the concept of truth. And it seems like an easy thing to deal with. We should all be able to look at evidence and determine whether or not something is factual or not. However, when our baseline assumptions about stuff are so ingrained in on us, it's hard to overcome that and actually determine that something that you fundamentally assume to be true is in fact false. For instance, one of the things that absolutely bugs the crap out of me is why this state is called New Mexico when this country is called Mexico. It should clearly be the other way around because this state used to be part of the old Mexico and it is no longer that. And Mexico's current borders are in fact their new borders. But because we've been told time and time again that this state is New Mexico and that country is called Mexico, we just assume that this makes sense and this is the proper order of things, even though having me explained it to you just now will show you the error of your ways in those assumptions. Now, the reason I'm bringing up this difficulty that we as a human species tend to have distinguishing between truth and untruth is that recently a documentary was released on this platform, YouTube, and other streaming services for free that challenges a lot of the underlying assumptions that environmentalists have when it comes to green energy. Now, I first caught wind of the controversy surrounding this documentary film via Lauren Chen's channel and an excellent video that she did on this very subject. That will be linked in the description box of this video. I definitely recommend you go over and check it out. And obviously, if you haven't subscribed, what are you doing? Go over and subscribe to her channel because this video would not exist had I not seen that one, then decided to watch the movie, then decided to make this video. Now, a lot of the controversy around this movie and the vitriol from the environmentalist movement has been laid at the feet of filmmaker Michael Moore, which is interesting because Michael Moore is not the director of this movie. He is in fact the executive producer of this movie, but it makes sense because Michael Moore did post this on his YouTube channel and he has been promoting this movie. His name's attached to it and Michael Moore is a far leftist, so the idea that he is betraying or putting forward right-wing propaganda against the environmentalist movement is something that's going to anger these people. Now, after watching this movie for myself, I actually learned 3 things about the outrage. Number 1, the environmentalist movement is not angry about this movie lying, they're angry about the parts of this movie that are actually true. Number 2, this is in no way, shape, or form pro-fossil fuel or right-wing propaganda. It's actually really far leftist. And number 3, this movie has no interest whatsoever in providing a solution because nuclear energy is never mentioned throughout the course of this movie, and I was looking for it the whole time. Now let's take those things one at a time, and the first one is that they're angry that this movie has truth in it, not that the movie has lies in it. And this should be obvious to anybody who knows anything about Michael Moore. If you were going to get angry at Michael Moore for lying in his movie, then you would start with his first movie, Roger and Me, which is an entire documentary about how Roger, the CEO of General Motors, is dodging Michael Moore and not giving him an interview, when in reality, Michael Moore interviewed the guy twice during the course of filming the movie. So obviously they don't care about lies, so what's the truth in the movie that they're angry about? And the truth in the movie that they're angry about is the exposing of certain aspects of green energy, specifically biofuels, as well as solar and wind energy. Now, the movie goes out of its way to be an expose of sorts on biofuels, and essentially what the movie is trying to expose to the audience about biofuels is that the idea that we're just burning scraps of wood that we're no longer using for energy is kind of nonsensical, when in reality what's actually going on is deforestation and burning the trees just with a fancy name called biofuel. And not only is this deforestation not good for the environment, but it's actually heavily subsidized by the federal government, and the subsidies date back largely to the Obama administration and his Green Jobs initiative. Now, the next thing that the film tries to expose is solar and wind energy as actually not being that good for the environment. And this is due to a combination of factors, like the fact that you have to mine the materials in order to make the solar panels and the windmills, and they only last for about 10 to 15 years, and then there's no real way to recycle those materials, so they often get dumped into our environment, causing pollution in the environment. And on top of that, these are weak sources of energy that are infrequent. So what you need to do in order to have a solar farm is to have a natural gas or coal-fired power plant in order to supplement the grid for when there's no sunshine or when there's no wind for the wind turbine. Now, longtime viewers of this channel will remember me bringing up these exact points about solar panels and windmills on this channel when I was talking about nuclear energy, and specifically the points related to Germany, who invested heavily in solar panels, built more solar panels per capita than almost any other country, and actually saw their carbon emissions go up because they shut down nuclear power plants, which are more consistent and produce cleaner energy better. And I compared and contrasted that to France, which we're going to talk a little bit more about later. Now, it's important to note that it's not only the fact that solar and wind aren't actually as green as we've been led to believe that's a problem with them. You also need a gigantic surface area for these solar panel farms, and that surface area ends up destroying local environments. Deserts are in fact ecosystems, and it doesn't help those ecosystems when you flatten out the area, remove plants and wildlife that are native to that area in order to have a gigantic solar farm. And if we're not even getting the carbon benefits that we're supposed to get from them, and we have to build a coal or natural gas plant in order to supplement them, it's not really worth it to do all this destruction to the environment just so we feel better about ourselves. Now, the second thing that the environmental organizations that are angry about this film say about it is that it's essentially right-wing propaganda because it was being pushed by Breitbart and other conservative news outlets for the reasons I talked about with the green energy. However, this movie is distinctly far-left propaganda. I've always said that you can scratch the surface of these environmentalist movements, and you'll typically find two things. One is Malthusian economics, and the other one is socialism. And this movie promotes both. The overall message of this movie is anti-human overpopulation nonsense coupled with anti-capitalist nonsense. And you can see this represented throughout the film. And one of the things that caught my attention that I absolutely will insert a screenshot of is this chart related to farmland and how we're not using as much farmland as we used to because we've wasted the land somehow. Now, this is completely ridiculous. We're not using as much farmland as we used to because farming has become insanely more efficient than it used to be. I mean, think about this chart. It's basically saying that since around the late 90s, early 2000s, we've lost a lot of farmland, but have we produced less food or more food in the last 20 to 30 years? The answer is definitely more food. There are less hungry people in the world as the world's population has gone up, and over this period of time where they're saying that we're using less and less farmland. That is a moniker of efficiency, not a moniker of us destroying the environment. And by the way, it's not ambiguous stuff like this. There are people in this movie that outright say that we need to reduce the human population and reduce consumption in our population in order to get the planet to heal. Now, this is basic Malthusian economics, the idea that we're not going to produce enough resources if population goes up and global famine and all these problems are going to occur. And the thing is that this has been brought up time and time again, and it's most famously brought up in Paul Ehrlich's The Population Bomb, which decided that we were all going to starve to death by the 70s or the 80s. Not really sure, because every time his date was passed, he just moved the date forward a little bit, and we proved him wrong time and time again. Now, the reason Paul Ehrlich and all these Malthusian acolytes are always wrong about overpopulation is because they all fail to take into account that humans are not just consumers, but they are in fact producers. And in the same way that we grow more food on less land, we become more efficient in other areas of the economy in order to produce for more people. They basically combine their socialist ideals with their ideals related to the environment and make the argument that the planet is finite amount of resources. All we can do is redistribute those same resources. We can never produce more. We can never be more efficient with them. And the best thing we can do for humanity when the finite planet and all we can do is redistribute is limit the population of humanity so that everybody gets a larger share. When in reality, economic growth and wealth of the world has gone up with the population of the world, not down. So to be clear, this movie is in no way, shape, or form right-wing or conservative propaganda. It is far leftist propaganda through and through with anti-capitalist and anti-human messaging. Now, I gave this movie my full and undivided attention, and I had my ears perked up just waiting for a single mention of nuclear power or nuclear energy, and there was nothing in this movie to be found, which is strange because all of the criticisms I've heard of green energy, like solar panels and windmills, I've heard before from proponents of nuclear energy. And in fact, this is what got me to change my position on nuclear power because it is in fact one of the safest forms of energy. It actually works, and it can be scaled up. And on top of that, and yes, I just said and twice in the same sentence, it actually produces less carbon than solar panels when construction is taken into account. And you'll remember earlier in this video, I talked about Germany spending twice as much on solar and wind and their carbon emissions going up and not down. Well, that was actually not the full story, because Germany did see some declines in their carbon emissions when they switched from coal supplementing their solar and wind to natural gas. However, all of those carbon gains were wiped out when they closed just 4 nuclear power plants in their country. And if that fact doesn't hammer it home enough that going away from nuclear towards solar and wind is a terrible idea if your goal is to reduce carbon emissions, just compare Germany to its neighbor France. France put half the money that Germany put into their supposedly clean energy program into nuclear energy, and they're producing double the amount of clean energy in their grid. Up to 89% of their energy is clean and carbon-free, as opposed to Germany's 43%. And unlike the environmental devastation that it costs to build these windmills and solar farms, nuclear, relatively to the energy that it produces, has a small footprint. And on top of that, the nuclear waste that we all hear so much about is the only energy waste in the entire world of any form of energy that is 100% containable, unlike the heavy metals and all the other toxins that are in solar panels and windmills, which again have to be replaced every 10 to 15 years. If your goal is a carbon-free source of energy that works today and will continue to work in the future, nuclear is the only option. And the fact that it doesn't get mentioned in this documentary film even once, when they spend all their time exposing the problems with solar, wind, and biofuel, really tells you everything you need to know about the intentions of this filmmaker and their political leanings. Because instead of nuclear, which wouldn't require us to fundamentally restructure society in order to implement, they proposed draconian population control, as well as the destruction of the world economy, as the only solution. So while I do find this movie interesting, and I appreciate the willingness of the filmmakers to question our baseline assumptions that solar and wind are just inherently better sources of energy that are good for the environment, you have to go into this movie with your eyes wide open. Don't let the fact that they may have some things that maybe sort of align with your political leanings skew you to the overall message and to just assuming that everything in this movie is true. And by the way, that's not just good advice for viewing this movie specifically. That's good advice for any piece of content that you might encounter. But those are just my thoughts. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. You guys know the drill. If you like this video, then show me by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on all my social medias. You can support me with the one-time donation links or the monthly ones down in the description. This has been me talking about Planet of the Humans. Till next time.